Disclaimer. I was originally going to use more actual footage for evidence for higher quality video, but recently YouTube has gotten mad at me for using footage from other channels, so I'll just be using pictures like I usually do. Disclaimer over. Necrodeus, Death God, is the closest anyone has ever come to killing Kirby. Despite this intimidating fact, Necrodian is often brushed off as an uninteresting, generic, unmemorable, and unimportant antagonist. This couldn't be further from the truth. Necrodeus is one of the strongest, highest beings in all of Kirby, and his defeat made a huge mark on the Kirby world forever. Though in this video, I will mostly be going over Necrodeus himself and save the underworld for another video. Necrodeus' own motives and origins are simple. He wants to destroy all light, and he is a god. The only question is, did gods come before or after Void? My bet is on before. Void is the origin of all matter. Gods aren't usually physical beings, they are ethereal, therefore they could predate matter. On top of this, Void is said to have no knowledge of good and evil, which would imply that there are some things beyond Void. Of course, we don't know if Necrodeus specifically predates Void, but it's a possibility. Some people say that Necrodeus being Latin for death god doesn't actually prove him being god of death, or prove that he's a god at all. Now later, we'll analyze a religion/cult dedicated to him that would say otherwise, but let's look at some evidence of him actually having power over death. When Kirby is first struck by Necrodeus, all it says is that he was hit by Necrodeus' mischievous magic. It doesn't specify that it was supposed to do one certain thing. Only after it says Kirby was split into 10 weaker Kirbys. Now spells that split Kirby into multiple Kirbys aren't a rarity. Dark Meta Knight's sword split Kirby into 4 entire other Kirbys, only for Dark Meta Knight it makes sense. He's a mirror being. He breaks into mirror shards upon death. So this attack is like shattering Kirby into multiple reflections. With Necrodeus, nothing about him has to do with being split into many. No, this wasn't a spell to split Kirby, this was a death hex. Kirby, being the unkillable god he is, survives the death blast, but Kirby is often seen to be malleable, so he explodes into a bunch of pieces. We see then Necrodeus effortlessly kill each of the smaller Kirbys without any trace of interference. We don't even see him wave his staff at them, they just die. If this isn't proof of him being a god over death, then I don't know what is. Next, there is excruciating evidence that Necrodeus wasn't always a skeleton. First, he has a nose. Skeletons don't have noses. Necrodeus is an intimidating force, so I don't think he will put on a fake clown nose. Next, there's an eye socket in the middle of his skull, and he has an extra eye in his mouth. It isn't always there, though, as if it's just floating around in the back of his skull. Finally, this statue basically confirms that Necrodeus was once alive. He has the third eye I mentioned, and an entire body with arms and everything. He has no skull necklace either, which will be important for later. Necrodeus has 2 areas dedicated to him, Necro Nebula and a large portion of Volcano Valley. Necro Nebula is neat because it's a realm, apparently, of worship for Necrodeus, obviously showing some people did revere him as a god. What's more interesting is how the shrine is connected to Popobo Islands, or more likely the 4 bosses that show up there because they were possessed by the dark smoke. They are quite similar to the evil clone bosses that keep cropping up in modern Kirby, but most important of all is the use of the word Nebula. Nebula means space cloud, which is already odd since it's very much on the ground when we find it. I mean, maybe. It kinda looks like it's on the ground. But it does have its own space cloud. But most importantly, Nebula is the last name of Dark Nebula, the ruler of the underworld. Some people still think that Dark Nebula being the ruler of the underworld is a mistranslation, as the original said ruler of darkness. But now, the name Nebula, god of the underworld, shows up in a location dedicated to the god of death, solidifying the connection. But, on top of everything, the DDD directory also calls Nebula the ruler of no underworld, and that was fans translated from the original Japanese version, and it still said underworld, so it's completely canon that Dark Nebula rules the underworld, or at least used to. Volcano Valley has a special area tied to Necrodeus, a magic door portal that leads to the Skull Seer. Speaking of, let's go over the members of the Skull Gang. There's the Skullies, the youngest members in charge of patrolling and guarding chests. They also live in Volcano Valley. The Red Skullies, whose entire job is to hold on to chests. Skullions, or Skull Lions, older Skullies who are tasked with guarding Necro Nebula and Necrodeus himself. The Skull Seer, the leader of the Skullies, who personally guards a rainbow coin, and the Skull Lord, who isn't related at all but is a greedy pig who did some kind of deal with Necrodeus to gain power. and this proves that there are people outside of Necrodeus' own gang that worship him. Also, we don't see many pigs in Kirby. There's Raffinelli, Gip, and this enemy named Bufu, who might be the same race as Skull Lord is. There is Forgo DDD mask that resembles a boar, which is implied to be modeled after some beast that lived in the Forgotten Land at one point. Could this be him? Also, according to this unused graphic, Bufu is also a part of the Skull Gang, which is odd. There is one other character I believe to be related to the Skullies, the Grooglooms. They appear just like Skullies, but without the skull. When light is shined on them, there's another skull underneath. We know Skullies can't stand the light as they always disappear when day rises, so it's my theory that the Skullies are made from skulls, layered in dark magic, and then given another skull on top, plus hands. Unlike what I and some other people have thought, these are not mandibles, they are hands. There are also some blue versions of the Grooglooms, but Necrodeus randomly goes from red to purple, so I don't think it matters. There's one place in Volcano Valley that is especially related to Necrodeus, the Skull Tower. We know this place is special to them because if you fall off, a swarm of Skullies appears out of nowhere to drag you away. An interesting and disturbing detail about this place is the music contains slowed down versions of the vocals from the Night Desert theme. So, is Sand Canyon also in cahoots with Necrodeus? In order to pierce the dark clouds to get to Necrodeus' realm, you need these rainbow coins that have Kirby's face on them. Now, I'm sure when this game came out, this didn't mean anything, but after the Void lore, this has huge ramifications, reinforcing that Void wasn't just a god of darkness, as these have rainbow powers. Also could imply combating religions in the Popopo Islands. And heck, now that I think about it, the Popopo Islands are literally named after an old unused name for Kirby, meaning the islands, in a way, were named after Kirby himself, which could have been one of the words used for a good reincarnation of Void before they decided on Kirby. Only problem is, in the canon cutscene, the medals don't have any Kirby faces on them. This could be due to the sprites being too small for Kirby faces, and there's only a single sprite, so they probably just didn't bother, but chances are the Kirby faces are just made to make the medals pop out more to players and aren't actually canon. But it's still worth bringing up, because if it is, that's pretty crazy. Necrodeus was actually mentioned in a Miiverse post to be a part of Kirby Triple Deluxe, saying the Sunstones are actually rays of Floralia's light, solidified into stones by someone who hates light. While many Kirby characters' goals are to spread darkness, Necrodeus is the only one that's said to actually hate light, at least as of now. Initially, I thought Tyranza stole the Sunstones from Necrodeus for Skatonia, like he stole the Dimensional Mirror, but after looking deeper into Floralia, and how it connects back to the bigger picture of ancient Kirby lore, Necro Nebula might have been a part of Floralia. We know the island can move, as it shows up out of nowhere after being Skull Lord, so we don't have to worry about why it's not where it should be. Another thing is, why are the Sunstones hidden everywhere? Without the use of black holes, which Necrodeus does not have, there's no way to destroy light. So Necrodeus' best bet is to hide the light. Looking back, it even specifically says Floralia's light, so Necrodeus has at least been to Floralia. Kirby Mass Attack even features a lot of bug and plant creatures, which ironically don't appear that much in Kirby Triple Deluxe. The real question left is, was Necrodeus a leader of Floralia, or a criminal? His group is called a gang, and his island appears low to the ground, but on the contrary, his place has an outer space around it, which looks quite similar to Royal Road, and implies that it's very high up, usually. But of course, we can't forget that line about it being its own realm, so it having its own atmosphere doesn't have to be important at all. But now, going back to one of the first things I brought up, which is how Necrodeus once had flesh. I believe there was some battle between Necrodeus and Sectonia, and she used the Sunstones to burn him to death. But, of course, being a god over death, he continued to live past what should have been his death. Some proof of this some kind of war is the necklace of skulls he has, which he did not have on his statue. Also worth noting, these appear to be human skulls. It's pretty much an undeniable fact at this point that humans have been to Popstar, but these could also be the skulls of the people of the sky, since they are kind of human-shaped. As expected, from Kirby lore standards as insanely dark as his headcanon is, I can't deny the possibility that he just burned over the course of time considering how bright Floralia is, but his place is its own realm with its own atmosphere, which clouds out the light, so who really knows? Of course, Necrodeus is dead for good now, and with Necrodeus and Dark Nebula dead, the messenger butterflies of the overworld take over, and Morpho reigns supreme. And that wraps everything into a nice bow. The main inhabitants of Hell are also bugs. There is one final important piece of Necrodeus lore, but it's definitely more crackhead theory territory, so I won't put it in what's supposed to be the confirmed canonical lore of Necrodeus. So I'll just put the basic premise of it with no further elaboration and save the rest for a different video. The portal Necrodeus gets sucked into at the end of Mass Attack brought him to another dimension, and he ended up in the clay universe of Rainbow Curse and was reborn as Dark Crafter. That's all you get. Like and subscribe to see that video whenever it comes out. And also the full lore of the underworld.